I know I had a bunch of people look at my personal statement because it's hard to write a personal statement. It's not like you're not used to writing about it. I don't like talking about myself.
Eventually, you're going to start picking up keys. You're going to start seeing similarities. And then, what I would do is I would go into those meetings with a notebook and I'd write down all the little acronyms.
Yeah, so think about that. If you're the first person to get your application in the portal on that day, you're the first application that those schools are going to see out of that 15,000.
Alrighty, welcome back to Three Guys in a White Coat, the podcast where Mike, Matt, and I give our perspective on what it takes to become a medical student. And this is a continuation of our series where we have the lucky privilege of interviewing our fellow classmates here at Stritch, and just kind of talking. You've heard plenty about Mike, Matt, and I and what we think, but we want to give you more perspective from what other people think as well. So,
and just as a disclaimer, you guys, remember, the things that we talk about, these are not dead set things you have to do. These are just things that we want you guys to think about, hear what people have done, hear people's experiences. So don't think if you hear something like, oh my God, I have to go do this, I have to go do that. Just, we want you guys to get some real ideas of what's going on, because we know as pre-meds when we were there, we all thought it's, you start in one place and you end up in the other, and some people zigzag, some people change, some people come back. So we just want to try to get some of those experiences out to you guys.
Yeah, and so today it's Mike and only one Matt again. I know last week I wasn't here, but today Matt is, or other Matt Summer is running a little bit of a 10K, so he's literally running away from his responsibilities today.
He's actually done right now. He's actually at school. He's blowing us off because he wants to study more.
A lazy bum. But we are joined by Zosha. She is one of our classmates. And so Zosha, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. I was born in New Zealand, but was mostly raised here in the States. I consider Portland, Oregon home. Went to Jesuit High School, go Satyrs, and then went to the University of Notre Dame. Graduated 2018 as a neuroscience major, and then I'm here at Stritch.
You were 2018?
I was 2018.
I didn't know that.
I'm a little baby.
Aww. I learned so much about everyone that we interviewed.
I know, it's kind of great. So you went straight from college into medical school.
I'm one of the people who went straight in.
See,
that's pretty fun.
That's interesting, because I feel like a lot of times we talk to people who have gap years and all that. So this will be cool today to get someone's perspective that has gone straight from college right into medical school and how that transition was and all that.
Yeah. So, just kind of to start from a little bit more about your background. Do you have any sort of medical family members, anyone else in the medical profession, or are you the first one riding the ship? Yeah,
so my mom's actually a physician. My mom's a pediatrician.
Okay.
And I guess the reason why medicine was on my radar, it was always on my radar because of my mom's profession, but when we moved to the States, she had to redo her board certification to be able to practice as a pediatrician.
Gotcha.
So she waited a while to do that, and it was when I was in 4th grade when she restarted her residency to redo it here in the States. And so at that point, she's done it, I think, 3 or 4 times residency because she's lived in so many different countries.
Wow.
One of the most motivated people I know. But when she was doing it for her last time, thank goodness, I was old enough to know and kind of realize when she wasn't home. And I realized that for those 3 years, my dad was essentially a single parent. We would come home from school, and Mom would be waking up to go on, a on-call shift. And it wasn't that I was upset that Mom wasn't home. I was just old enough to kind of wonder why Mom wasn't, as in what was motivating her so much to spend so much time outside, and what was she kind of pursuing with her career.
Yeah.
See, that's interesting, because I was talking to one of our other classmates yesterday when we were out about that, because both of her parents are physicians and all that, and I'm always kind of interested as to what your perspective of that growing up is, because I'm always very curious of, what will my kids think someday, like when I'm out doing this and doing that. So it's kind of cool that you've just kind of shed some light onto that for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was sad that she wasn't home, but she was able to balance the important things. So Christmas, piano recitals, sporting events, whatever. Whatever it was. And then just going to high school, I was kind of aware that I was drawn a little bit more to the sciences and that sort of critical thinking. And so I kind of went into college knowing that medicine was maybe something I wanted to pursue, which I think helped with my going straight into med school process.
Yeah, because I mean, when you grow up, at a young age, you don't understand like why. You just understand that they're not there.
Right.
So I guess my question is for you, like, at what point did you start realizing, okay, this is, you said kind of in high school it dawned on you, but did that affect you in selecting medicine as a career path? Were you like, maybe I want to be home or like the way that I saw this affected me?
Yeah. I think it's hard. Once my mom started working, though, she took a type of job where she's able to balance both a career and being at home. She works part-time. And I realized that the 3-year period where she wasn't home was a temporary period. And I understood why she did it. And she loves her job now, and she'd come home and she'd talk about an interesting case she saw at the dinner table, and my dad would be rolling his eyes, but it was interesting for me and also my brother. So yeah, that's kind of how it motivated me to go into medicine, or maybe put that idea on the back burner of my mind.
Cool.
She never pushed me into it or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So at what point in your college experience did you realize, okay, it's going to be medicine? Let's put the burners on. Let's go get it.
Well, I went in as science pre-professional at Notre Dame. It's kind of a little bit of all the science-y classes. And it was kind of junior year when we started talking about embryology and started maybe considering the possibility of anatomy. And I was taking neuroscience classes that I realized, okay, this is actually what I really like, and let's kind of go for it and see what happens.
Okay. So was your exposure to like science classes, was that like during your second year, first year?
First year's hard, right? That's like gen chem and bio. It was probably more towards junior and senior year, but I knew that I had to take those steps to be able to, or take those kind of prerequisite steps to be able to take those more advanced classes. And something that I think could motivate people if they maybe didn't have a physician at home to talk about what a physician does is maybe going shadowing at a hospital or being able to find some sort of mentor to get them through that kind of initial hurdle of those prereqs.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to talk about because, I feel like there's a lot. Personally, when I was in college, I thought that if I wanted to do medicine, I needed to know from like the entry of my freshman year. I was like, I need to go. I need to, So it's nice to hear that you were able to come to that realization, your junior or senior year and be like, okay, I've done the work. I know science, and like this is where I see. Because we want to make sure our listeners know that even if they're sophomores, juniors, and now they start realizing that they like medicine, they can still go and achieve that.
Yeah, and even off that too, like. We've talked about this a few times. A lot of people who are in pre-med will say in like their first couple of years, they don't like the courses they're taking. They're like, I think I want to be a physician, but cell biology really just isn't piquing my interest right now.
So I don't blame you.
Yeah. And that's like what you just said, you knew that you had to take like those entry level courses to get into like the higher level ones. And that's what Keats talked about last week too of, sometimes you just got to understand you got to do that grit work to get to the next step.
Yeah. Grit work is unfortunately part of the process in your undergrad, but was there any time that you had something else like running alongside of medicine like that you were thinking of doing?
Not too much. I did realize as I was going through undergrad that I really liked teaching people and explaining concepts to people. And it was kind of crazy. I was joking with my mom that I could imagine myself being in another life a preschool teacher. Aww. And she said, "Oh, that's so funny because that was my backup career too." And it's crazy how similar you are sometimes to your parents.
I feel like that's a pretty commonality between like people in medicine. Like we like to teach. Like that's like a big part of what we want to do. Like even like the podcast that we do right now.
And this is because we want to do that. Like we want to make sure.
Doctor means teacher in Latin.
There you go.
You learn something new every day.
There you go.
I always love when teachers bring that kind of stuff up. They're like, "Does anyone know the Latin Latin word for this or like what that? And I'm always like, I've probably heard this like 5 or 6 times, but it never sticks with me.
Yeah.
Nice. So, I mean, you talk about, your similarities to your mom and, kind of growing up with her as a pediatrician. Was she the main person that you saw okay, this is doing this right? Was she the one that helped you along the way? You said she never pushed you into it, which is a great thing. But was she your main source of guidance through the process?
So no. So my mom was not aware. My parents were both born and raised in Poland and did graduate school in Poland. So they're not familiar with the American undergraduate system, and they're not familiar with the American graduate/medical system. So this was a learning experience for all of us at the same time.
Yeah. So you went in this blind, pretty much.
Yeah. And my parents were always supportive, and they, did their research when they could, and supported me in any way that they could, but a lot of it was on me to be able to find mentors at Notre Dame who knew the system, counselors. We had an amazing pre-med medical counseling office.
That's really good because, it's not always that way. We've talked to certain, people,
at bigger schools especially, I'm sure.
Yeah, you kind of just don't have that support because there's such a large amount of people that may or may not want to do that. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah, those things can be extremely helpful, and especially when you have when you have the good ones who know how to help you get there. But so going off of that, so we've talked about you have your mom and all that. Who was your biggest mentor throughout this process? Was it that committee that was doing it with you at Notre Dame, or did you find a physician who went through the whole process here who was kind of all right, let's do this?
It was probably the counseling office. I didn't necessarily find a physician mentor until probably medical school. But the counseling office, I remember, they sat us down probably spring of sophomore year. They called a meeting with all the pre-meds. And they set up this PowerPoint that essentially said, you should aim to have this GPA. You need to, for lack of better word, check all these boxes. You should think about research, you should think about volunteering, you should think about doing all these extracurricular activities. And next year, we will start with your personal statement, and we'll start working on that and go. And it was one of those things where I think that was the closest I've ever come to a panic attack.
Yeah.
It can be overwhelming. And I think, Matt, what you were saying that, sophomore, junior year, it's not too late, because that's kind of where I was. It wasn't until that meeting that I was like, oh, we need to start making major moves for this if we do want to go straight in. Okay.
So off of that then, because that's a very interesting parallel to have of, I would have assumed that if you went straight in out of college that you had been doing a bunch of this stuff, preparing for it then. So that's even more interesting. So how did you balance now? You're a sophomore or junior. You find out that all right, I got to go do some of these things that they're now telling me. How did you balance that with school, and what were some of the things that you did once you found out?
So that was really, really anxiety provoking. Freshman or first year and second year, in undergrad were a little bit of an adjustment period for me, and I was still finding my people. So I knew that I needed to bump my GPA up a little bit. And so that was a huge adder of stress. I knew that I had to seek out a research lab, because I hadn't been involved in research. And I was going abroad the next semester, so I knew that labs weren't really interested in taking on someone who would be there for 5 weeks, would be gone for a summer, and then be gone for the entire fall semester. So I actually didn't join a research lab until spring of my junior year.
Wow.
So for people who think that it's too late, it's not too late, and you can do it. I have always had an interest in social justice and community volunteering and service work, so I had been involved in volunteering in the South Bend community since freshman year. And then I think the biggest thing is to be able, you do need to take on a lot of responsibilities and do a lot of things to get the ball moving, to be able to apply straight in. But I think the biggest thing that I could emphasize to people who are trying to do this process straight through is to be able to find a community of people who can support you. And for that, and to have an interest maybe perhaps outside of medicine. I think that's what we were just talking about before the podcast started. And for me, that was swimming. My friends and I started the club swimming team at Notre Dame. We held practices. We went to travel meets. Those people were my people. And it was convenient that none of them were really in the medical field. So I was able to be with people who didn't know anything about what I was doing, and I could just relax and talk to them.
And I'm sure starting that club was a part of your application, I'm assuming?
It was a huge part of my application. For those who are not familiar with the AMCAS application, they asked you to choose, I think, 3 meaningful experiences.
Yeah, 3 most meaningful.
Yeah, and the swim club was one of those for me. And even though it wasn't really medically or research related, it was something that I was so passionate about, and it had formed me as a person. And I learned a lot of those interpersonal skills, motivation, grit, et cetera, from
So
that club.
what made you pick that? Like, why that one over the countless other experiences you've probably had?
Probably because it took up a lot of my time.
Yeah.
It took us 2 to 3 years to be able to actually form the club. We had a lot of red tape to jump through.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where I have formed some of the most lifelong lasting friendships with those people.
Okay.
And it was just such a strong community of support for me that was my family, and I wanted to talk about that.
Perfect.
And I think that's the really big point to get across to people, is that your experiences that prepare you for medical school, for medicine in general, do not have to be
Not at
medically
all.
related, because like the swimming thing, it was a genuine experience for you, something that meant a ton to you, and you learned things that you can apply to all aspects of your life.
Exactly.
Instead of just having a medical experience you can apply to the medical part of your life.
Exactly.
So I think that's something that we absolutely want to enforce and emphasize to anyone listening, is that make sure that you're a balanced, diverse person with a lot of great experiences.
For sure.
The balance is key, for sure.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that going in the first time.
Yeah, and Zosha, you said that you had been volunteering as soon as your freshman year in college. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so South Bend, Notre Dame is in an interesting environment where it's in South Bend, which is a relatively underserved city, but Notre Dame itself has a $10 billion endowment. So it's just a really interesting dichotomy of 2 cultures. And so I really wanted to get out of, they call it the Notre Dame bubble, and I wanted to get off campus. So I got involved with the Boys and Girls Club pretty early on, and was a kind of just a tutor for, I think it was kindergartners and first graders, and then 3rd and 4th graders. So that was really fun.
Gotcha. That's great. So is that an experience that you continue throughout your entire experience at college?
Yeah, I continued it probably halfway through senior year.
Good.
So that was something that was continuous for me, and they really appreciated people who were there continuously. They actually sent me and one of my co-leaders of this club to the national conference for the Boys and Girls Club. Usually send board members, but they decided to send 2 volunteers. So that was really fun, and it was a cool experience that came from being in a program for a set, for a long amount of time, and being able to form those ties and that commitment. Exactly.
Yeah, and again, that's another thing that we like to hear when we interview, and we kind of draw those things out, because
we're not lying.
Yeah, it's important. You need to have experiences, and again, this is something that you found before you were like, oh, I need to do volunteer work to be a medical student. It was something that you wanted to do because you liked it. You have a passion for it. It means you're going to commit to it, and it's going to be something that's long term. And that's an amazing thing, and it's, again, one of those genuine experiences that you earn in some real life experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's like we've talked about this a bunch, you guys. Like, the long term is what they're really interested in. If you've done it for a while, you get a really cool perk. You get sent somewhere, maybe. I mean, that doesn't happen all the time, but it can. So when you were there for that long, were you working with the same kids over and over, or did you kind of get a bunch of different people, or did you have someone that you kind of started with and then you followed them through for a couple years?
So I stuck with the same grade. So I wasn't with the same kids as they, moved up through grades. I said bye to them. I guess, if there was a first grader the first year that I worked with them when they were maybe a 3rd grader or a 4th grader.
Okay.
And that was fun. But it also, depends on whether their parents can bring them or not. There are a lot of other factors, but I was usually working with the same grade. But usually same kind of staff, same volunteers.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah.
And so, just continuing a little bit, you also did research when you were a junior, spring year, which is great. Can you tell us about your experience there?
And how you found them?
Yeah, so I was picky with my research lab. I sent out probably around 10 emails to labs that I was interested in, and I was a neuroscience major. I was a poverty studies minor. So I was interested in how growing up in an underserved or perhaps low SES, socioeconomic status background, would be able to affect neurocognitive development. And so I joined a psychology lab called the Cognition Learning and Development Lab, the CLAD Lab. And that worked with preschoolers and trying to understand, essentially what it did was it tried to understand how kids learned math and math concepts, and then perhaps how to better help those kids learn those concepts. So I actually ended up doing a thesis. I was
While you were in college?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a requirement there's an honors program at Notre Dame, and to graduate, they asked you to submit a thesis by graduation.
Wow.
So I wrote a thesis essentially on the difference in mathematical understanding in kids from low SES and high SES backgrounds, and I specifically looked at the way that they moved their hands to help their understanding of math. And essentially, it included playing math games with a lot of really, really cute kids.
Aw.
So you mean like how the person trying to learn was using their hands, or how like the person teaching them was like using them to instruct them?
It was mostly the person that they're trying to learn.
Okay.
And there are a lot of subtleties that I could get into, whether it was a kind of like an object that you could move, or whether you were touching something on a counting book. But essentially, I was just trying to understand the way their hand movements and hand gestures helped their overall mathematical ability, because it is such an abstract concept.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, and so a lot of our listeners are curious about, how they find these research experiences, because sometimes colleges have overcrowded labs, or some colleges don't have any labs whatsoever. And so, I mean, you started with an idea of something you wanted to work with. You said you were nice and good. I mean, I think you should be picky with the research. That, again, you're passionate about what you do. But were these cold emails? Had you met the professors or the people in the labs prior to sending your emails?
A lot of them were cold emails. The thing that I tried to do to make myself stand out was that I think you, in your previous podcasts, have mentioned reading up about some of the professors' work and maybe referencing their papers. But I think also what's key is being able to tie those references from those papers, if you're able to, into the experiences that you've had in your own life, and how those inform your interests, and where you envision taking the research and your interests, and how you envision running with it. Something that I also told my future PI was that I was going to write a thesis, and that I think was able to transmit that I was really serious about this, and that I was committed. And even though I was coming in, quote unquote, relatively late in the game, my junior year, spring semester, it was something that I committed a considerable amount of time of my schedule to.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, that's a great piece of advice right there.
Yeah.
Because we never really touched on that, but that is the main point of, if you can read up on it, understand it, and even if you can say, I don't know how to do this, but I've done something like this, and this kind of is making me want to influence myself in this direction, and I want to go this way with it, and then throwing the thesis thing on top of it. Was it a guy or a girl?
It was a girl.
Okay, so she was probably like, well, this girl's serious. Like, I know if I get this person in here, she has something that she needs to take away from this, so my investment is going to be worth it to me.
Yeah, it's going to be productive.
And another thing that I would also recommend, I know sometimes it's hard to be picky when you're looking for a lab, but if you're able to get a PI that responds to you, that wants to meet with you regularly, and that shows interest before you join their lab, that's going to be a reflection of what your PI is going to be like when you're in the lab too.
Exactly.
So if you have someone who takes 2 months to respond to an email, or 2 months to set up a meeting with you, and you are looking to get something out of the lab, like a thesis, that could be something to keep in consideration too. I know it's hard to be picky, and I know it's really stressful when you're looking for labs as an undergrad or a post-bac student, but that is something to keep in
you need to
mind.
value your own time too. Like, we do need them to help us with this part of it, but your time is valuable.
The
as much
respect should be mutual.
Right.
Yeah, and that is something that we really like to try and drive home, because the academic environment is so much different than like a business environment, where oftentimes we're like, please take me. Like, I need to be able to do this. Like, please take me.
Right.
But to have the self-respect, self-confidence to be like, I want to make sure that this is going to fit me too.
Right. And I think that's really important. Another topic that I would like to say about research is that when you apply to medical school, or you're looking for research, it doesn't have to be medical research. Mine was psych research. There are people who do research in a lot of other things that don't necessarily fit into the quote-unquote hard sciences or medical route, but they're interested when you apply, they're interested in seeing that you're able to think in a research-oriented way. And
It's the process.
Exactly, and are interested in learning and sticking to a project.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I mean, you worked with people, you know,
Right.
like, and as physicians, someday we are going to work directly with people.
Exactly. Any type of research, you're able to extrapolate lessons that will help you inevitably in medicine, just like you were saying.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a problem.
Good.
So, is it okay if I circle back to something a little bit?
Yeah, go for it.
So I know you said that, you know, you came straight in, you know, you're with a bunch of people that have done, you know, multiple gap years and all that. What do you think retrospectively from what we've done so far? Do you wish that you had taken time? Or are you, you know, like, I'm going to be like a resident. When you'll be a resident by what? You'll be 26?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
like,
essentially, do you wish you had time in between?
Which is crazy. You're going to be a resident at the age that I'm at right now, which is just like that's two totally different parallels of life.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you, looking back on that, how do you feel about it?
When I was an undergrad, I didn't consider anything else than going in. Like, I knew that the idea of taking a gap year existed, but for some reason I wasn't interested in that, and I was motivated enough, you know, I wanted to keep going. I didn't want to take a break. And I didn't realize how many people did until I got here at Stritch, when I realized probably less than 10% of our class went straight in.
Yeah, that's something that's always very surprising.
Yeah, and I'm still surprised by that. And that's not to say that going straight in is bad or taking a gap year is bad. People need different things out of life. But people talk about all the traveling and the things that they did, and that, you know, that sounds fun too. But I don't regret taking a gap year. I think I was ready for it mentally, emotionally. I had found a really, really good support system. I knew that my family was supportive. I'm in a relationship that's supportive. And so I kind of knew that I had my feet firmly planted on the ground, or as firmly planted as they can be before you hit the wall of information that's medical school. So I felt ready for that emotionally, maturity-wise.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
As I think back to, like, when I was in that, and if I had gotten in right out of school, I don't think I was emotionally ready to handle that. So, like, that's why I feel like I needed those 2 gap years. But, like, I'm so proud that you were, like, able to go straight into it. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, and it sounds like you, I mean, have always been very good about this throughout your experience, is just knowing yourself and, like, being able to say, this is something I'm ready for, you know, having that introspection to be like, I can handle this right now in my life. Did you feel pressured to go in right away?
Not at all. No. Not at all.
Okay, good.
What I was saying in undergrad, you know, I was saying freshman and sophomore year were a little bit anxiety provoking, and I got to the point where I was really struggling in classes, had trouble falling asleep at night, and it was just a vicious cycle. And I studied abroad, and I actually went to Mexico, and their way of life is completely different.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's talk at the table for 3 hours, and then, you know, go out if you want to, and it's a weeknight, and it's totally fine. Have a good time. It's all about people relationships that matter, and that slowed me down and really, really recentered me, and I was able to take that with me, and just being able to focus on myself and focus on my relationships with people while I'm balancing all these responsibilities kind of balanced out the seesaw that was my life at that point.
Yeah.
And knowing that balance, and it took me a learning experience, and it took me a lot of stress to go through that and find myself. But once I had kind of grounded myself, then I was able to go into medical school feeling relatively grounded. And it takes people a longer time to figure that out sometimes, or people don't have the opportunity to have that experience. And it, you know, maybe something's going on at home that you need to figure out before you start med school, and that's totally fine too.
Yeah.
Everyone's path is different.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I know, like, it sounded like when you said, like, you found your people outside of, you know, the pre-med community.
Right.
I was very similar to that. My own experiences were, like, I actually didn't like hanging out with any of the pre-meds from my college very much.
Yeah.
Not to say that any of them were bad, you know, people or whatever. It's more of just, like, for me, I didn't need that inner competition or that stress and anxiety of having someone else potentially being a benchmark next to me.
Right.
So is it something that you felt as well?
Oh, absolutely. Engineering people are the best. They're my favorite now.
Yes. All my friends were engineers too.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's so amazing. They also helped with physics homework too.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah.
That's great.
Can we bring them back for the farm?
Yeah,
Right?
I was gonna say, we're going to need all the engineers come through for us. So you did talk a little bit about this, but just kind of want to go deeper. we have a lot of, stress on the way to get there. A lot of, times we're like, man, can I do this? And even now, we're in med school. How do you keep your motivation, your spirits up? Or how did you throughout, college, balancing everything, even now? How have those things changed?
Right. I think the number one thing, and I still struggle with this myself, is putting myself first and taking care of myself. So working out as much as I possibly can. I try to maintain the same bedtime routine every night. I start packing up my things by 9 p.m. I'll light a candle. I'll make my lunch for the next day. I'll do my bathroom routine, and I'll go to bed and I'll read. And reading an actual book that's not medically related is really nice for me, and it just lets me kind of unwind a little bit. Stretch is awesome because it also has the Transcendental Meditation course that you can take, and I meditate every once in a while. I'm not as stringent with it as I probably should be, but that really, really helped. And then also finding people that are able to kind of balance you out, whether it's friends from medical school that you're comfortable hanging out with and you don't feel like they set that benchmark that you were referencing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or whether it's a significant other, or whether it's, calling your family or calling your friends from undergrad, or finding a hobby that's not medically related. I think that's so, so important to be able to take time for yourself. In high school, one of my mentors in high school said, you'll never remember the nights that you spend studying. And, I feel like there should be an asterisk with that, because at some point, you do need to have studying nights.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to be able to also live your life and not let the first thing that you say about yourself when you do talk to someone is, oh, I'm a medical student. Who are you outside of medicine?
Oh, my word. I want that.
I feel like
framed.
I avoid that more now.
Oh, yeah. No,
Sometimes I just don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, no, and I love that aspect, because you don't want to be that shouldn't be the only thing that defines you.
Right.
You should be, obviously, one of the reasons that we are medical students is we're able to have a balanced life where we have other things that define us.
Right.
And those are important to keep regardless of how stressful life gets, regardless of how busy things get. You come first. I love that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I guess now looking back on everything, now you're a med student. M2 now. What up?
Crazy.
What do you think that you did very well getting here? And what do you think you would have changed getting here?
Well, the things that I did really well is I learned that I'm a morning person.
Okay.
I learned that my brain functions better in the morning. So what I did, I was copying my friend, but what I did was that I would get up probably, 5:45, 6 in the morning, and I would go to our student center and I would start doing homework or the work that I needed to do for that day. And it's fabulous working at 6 a.m. because no one texts you. You can kind of just put your phone away and you know that nothing important is going to happen. And then I just cranked work out until probably 8:30, whenever my first class was. And then I went to class. And I was going to class knowing that I had cranked out, 2 hours of really, really quality of work. And then I could, go to class, go to swim practice if I wanted to go to practice, work out if I really wanted to work out, whether, it's in medical school now and I'm not on the team, and then able to do more work afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. I think, starting off strong is a big part in being able to figure that out.
Yeah, so you feel like you got your routine down, you knew what was going to function well for you, when the coursework started and all that.
Right, learning my study habits too.
Good.
Good. So what is something that maybe looking back now you can be like, man, I could have done that better?
I think this is an ever-present challenge, and I think part of the med school or med student type personality doesn't help me with this, but always comparing myself to others. And what you were saying about benchmark, that resounds with me, and I'm sure it resounds with hundreds and hundreds of people, but just not getting into your own head too much. And I think something that they said this year at the beginning of orientation, that they were kind of putting us in the mindset of slowly beginning to prepare for STEP, is just ignore the noise. And that's something that I've actually repeated to myself over and over and over again. Ignore the noise. And so kind of going back with taking time for yourself, I never come here on the weekend because I don't want to see, I don't want to compare myself with other people and give myself another reason to doubt what I'm doing when I know that it works for me.
Well, we appreciate you coming today then.
Yeah.
Right.
It's one of those things they're in that room, you're like, oh man, they've been studying since there, but really they're watching Netflix.
Exactly. Just doing my own thing.
Good. Yeah, I think that's a big part of just being, and this is one of the reasons that we're doing this podcast and interviewing everyone from our classes. We want everyone to know that there's no formula. Like there is, what you do for your own self should be, you should be comfortable with that at the end of the day.
Ideally, you can trust yourself and know yourself well enough to kind of stick by your guns, because sometimes that's hard.
Yeah.
And that's what the skill you need to know in medical school, because people are going to be doing their own thing and maybe having fun this weekend when you're studying and you're wondering, oh my gosh, should I be doing that too? Like, am I able to do that? Or they're studying and you're relaxing or spending time with loved ones. Oh, should I be studying? It's like, no, trust yourself. You know yourself. You got this.
Yeah, and I think that's such a big thing that we can't emphasize enough.
Yeah,
so.
And I'm still learning that too.
Oh yeah, and we'll keep learning it too.
I'm going to say we're going to be learning that until we're well into our careers. Even.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, looking ahead now, are you going to pursue pediatrics like your mom? Do you like kids? Do you like psych from all the research that you've done with that?
Oh, it was so funny. Pediatrics was the one specialty that I did not want to do, because I did not want to become my mom. But that's what I'm interested in. That's what I love. And so whether we like it or not, I think we become clones of our parents.
Yeah.
So yeah, pediatrics. I'm deciding on whether I want to subspecialize or not. I shadowed a pediatric cardiologist this summer and absolutely fell in love with the subspecialty. So
that's great.
Maybe seeing if I want to do something like that.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of funny you say that, because you think you know exactly what you don't want to do, and all of a sudden
then things change and you see one person do it, and I think that comes down a lot to the person that you work with too. Like the physician that you were with for that was probably just a really genuinely good person. You probably felt really comfortable around them. They were teaching you things, all that, and that can really drive, I feel like, where you feel like you want to go. Because sometimes I feel like I want to become more like that person, not necessarily what they're doing.
Right.
But mentors can just do that to you so well. And that's when you find the best ones.
Yeah.
So going back to the application portion of your time, letters of recommendation is a big thing that students always are like, oh my God, how many do I need? Who do I talk to? Who's going to do this? So at Northeastern, I had to have 6 letters of recommendation. Okay. How many did Notre Dame have you do? Did you guys do a committee letter? Did you submit all yours by yourself?
Okay. I'm trying to think back, and I don't know if this is 100% for sure. Okay. But I think we had to have 5. And then they did a committee letter as well. Okay. So for my 5, they recommended at least, I think, 3 professors, but 2 of them had to be in science classes. I don't know if that's for all schools. I think
that's how Northeastern's was too.
Okay. So I did 2 professors. One, I went to every single one of their office hours. Thank you, organic chemistry, for not coming easily. But I was able to meet my professor relatively well because he saw me there all the time. So he wrote one, and then I had one of my biolab professors write the other one. For my non-science professor, I had an English professor who was absolutely incredible, and I had 2 semesters in a row with him. So he got to know me in a relatively intimately sized class. So he wrote one about and I asked, we were talking, he had a meeting with me beforehand, and he was saying that the perk of having a person in the English department write one is he's able to see how you're able to express yourself, but also be able to communicate ideas in a class with other people and see how you're able to maybe develop new ideas or challenge respectively other people's ideas. And that's really cool, because that's a skill that you need, communication in medicine too.
Yeah. It's always interesting, because I think my college was no different. They asked for, some science and then one outside of science. And I almost felt like the outside of science one was going to be really strong.
Me too.
It's because, it's a class, for me, it was a history professor. And I just really enjoyed his class. I was very engaged. And, I only had one class with him, but I was able to develop a good relationship. Right. And it's one of those things where it was out of interest. It was completely driven by interest. Whereas some of the other science ones, you've had them in gen classes. You've had them, kind of in this one class, but not really. Yeah. So, I don't know. I always feel like those ones are a different perspective.
Those ones were harder for me to get too, right? Because they're the teachers for every single other pre-med in the class. Right. And how many other recommendation letters are they writing?
Yeah. So that's the thing is is there going to follow a general outline that they usually use, or is it going to, versus someone who doesn't normally write one, they're going to be put more, in my opinion, more into it.
I think for you, I think you just summed it up beautifully, is I feel like people that aren't in the sciences that write your letters, they come at it from a completely different angle.
Exactly.
You know, I feel like when you are an organic, like an organic chemistry professor or like a physics professor, you feel like you have to talk about the science, and you kind of lose sight of like the student. Whereas like an English professor or someone that has like no idea what the process is, like just says, you know, this person does this, they do that. Like they communicate you in a completely different form.
Yeah.
And I took a communications class in college as well, and I never really thought about it, but that was a lot more open debate, like what you were talking about.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like in science where you just go and sit there and you just let everything wash over you. Their classes are very much like, all right, here's an idea, debate me on it.
Let's challenge you, see how you think.
See, can you hold it up?
Yeah,
Do you
exactly.
actually know your stuff behind it?
Exactly. Or how well are you able to communicate your ideas? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something that I did do with the science professors, though, and I would recommend for people to do too, is Notre Dame had us write a little snippet about who we were, what our interests were, what our goals are, and I had a one-on-one meeting with every person who wrote my recommendations, if I was able to, and I gave them my resume or my CV, my kind of personal statement that I was drafting for my AMCAS application,
Yep.
and then also just about who I am as a little bit of a background. And then I had a meeting with them, and that really helped all of them.
That was
Yeah.
a good lead into the personal.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I had a packet as well that I filled out for them, being like, this is who I am, this is my motivation.
Exactly.
So, I mean, yeah, you just talked about personal statement, which is the taboo word there. Personal statement. How did you go about that process? Because we've had an episode where we talked about it. We talked about how often we rewrote ours, how many people we had read ours. What was your experience writing a personal statement?
We started senior year. They had us start thinking of ideas and start drafting. They had people who had, maybe it was definitely junior year. Sorry, because they had seniors come in who had gotten into medical school tell us about their personal statement and about how that worked for them.
Oh, excellent. That's helpful.
Yeah, and they give examples of their personal statements as well. I think they read off of some of theirs. It was difficult for me. It was kind of like staring at the blank computer screen, and you're just watching the cursor blink, and you don't know what to write.
Oh, yeah.
And I ended up writing one that I completely trashed, and it was, I think, February or March, and I went to the advising office, and I said, I've been working on this for 4 months, and it's trash. It's not what I want to submit. And she said, well, that's awesome. And I said, what do you mean that's awesome? She says, you've been working on this for 4 months. That means that you've gotten a lot of ideas flushed out, and you know which ideas you don't want to use, so just start again. So I would say the biggest thing is don't be discouraged if you write 1, 2, 3 drafts and you feel like you haven't gotten anywhere. The thing is, you've written 3 drafts, and now you know 3 different ways that you don't want to present yourself, and that's huge, because you wouldn't have had that experience or that opportunity if you had started writing your personal statement the night before it was due.
Absolutely. And like we talked about, like in our episode of that, where like for me, I need something on paper that I can look at, mold, or throw away.
Right.
And I think that what you said, where you have ideas and you flush out, exactly what you don't want to talk about.
Right.
You want, and then you start really honing down on what you do find important, what you do find as a very personal experience to write about. So what was something that really stood out to you in your personal statement? Like, what do you think jumped off the page?
Yeah. What was the part where you were like, every time you wrote it or like ready, you're like, all right, like here it comes. Like this is the punch, like they're ready.
Oh man, I don't even. I wrote about research, but I wrote about kind of the grit and the kind of the determination that I had to kind of crank out a thesis as quickly as I did, and how steep of a learning curve that was for me when it comes to the research world, because there's attrition in research, especially when you're working with people, and there are lots of things that happen, and there's a lot of frustration that can occur, but there's also so much strategy in the most beautiful way, and just learning how people learn, and being able to work with people and to develop relationships with these young kids as I was studying them and teaching them. I don't know, it was I don't know exactly what my punchline was that I conveyed it with, but it was just conveying a sentiment about my appreciation for that opportunity.
Yeah, and that is in my opinion the most important part about the personal statement. It's not about necessarily what you did in general. It's about what you learned, how that shaped you, and how that really, really has affected you moving forward in your life.
That's the most important part, and I think if you can devote as much space to that as you can, that's so important.
Yeah, because I mean, we've said like 10% what you did, 80% of how it affected you.
Yeah.
Because that's
How
the
you learned,
meat.
how you grew.
Yeah, I mean,
What changed?
That's where you get to show, your character, So that's a really cool thing. I mean, do you have, what would your advice be for anyone writing their personal statements now?
Find people who know you as a person. And I would say find people who know you in an academic light. And those don't have to be two separate things, but for me they were. I didn't have too many people proofread my things, actually.
Okay.
Which I know is maybe not what most people do. Perhaps maybe I wouldn't recommend that to other people. But I had people who knew me proofread my personal statement, and I had 1 or 2 research mentors in my lab who were PhD students who had written a number of personal statements themselves, proofread mine. And they were kind of able to kind of get what you were saying, that the 10%, 80%, 20%, whatever it is, just what's the meat of it, and what did you take away from your experiences, and how did those form you? So that kind of was my process.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I had like my friends read it, and then I had like professors read it and all that. And it was always funny how different people read it different. Like my friends would be like, "This is like not how I see you at all." But like I get why like you're writing it like this.
Right.
Whereas like academic people would be like, okay, like I like the way you did this, but like you need to change this about it. So I personally found that I enjoyed having multiple people read it because you have no idea whose desk it's going to come across when you throw it to.
I would
anyone in
recommend
school.
the more people the better, up to I think a certain limit maybe.
Yeah,
That's what Semler said too.
You still need to have it be you. At the end of the day, if you're taking everybody's advice, you're not taking your own. And it becomes less of you, or it becomes so much of everybody's advice that you're so scattered.
Yeah.
I think the temptation in most personal statements, or just the application in general, is to be able to say, these are all the things I did. There's a temptation to go for volume rather than quality.
Yeah.
And so like if you focus on 1 or 2, even 3 maybe, examples that were truly meaningful and that you can actually talk about, it's so much more impactful.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not a accomplishment list that you rattle off.
No.
Right.
It should be you at the end of the day. And I feel like that was something that I learned pretty late into it too, was I like wanted to tell about like the people that helped me get there. And I was like, like this person did this person did that. And I remember when Dr. O read one of mine, he was just like, this is fantastic. I know everything about Dr. So-and-so. I have not a clue who you are.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I kind of assumed that you would deduce that I was like showing you that because of her, I'm like that. And he was like, no. This is your time. Like no one else is yours. Like take it.
It's your time to shine.
Right.
It's your opportunity.
And so, okay, you've done your personal statement, you've done your application, you're doing your interviews now. How did you prepare for interviews?
So Notre Dame had a career office where I think it was really kind of geared towards business people looking for internships, but I kind of jumped on the bandwagon, and they had a medical interview session. So I did one of those before I went to my medical school interviews. The one thing that I wish that I had done better is prepare for MMIs. And for those who don't know what those are multiple mini interviews.
We've never talked about those actually.
Yeah, those are very different.
Yeah. So Notre Dame didn't have a practice interview for that, and I, for some reason, just didn't do as much research, I think, as I wished that I had done, and I was a little bit taken aback by the speed of the MMI process.
Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Yeah. Have either of you gone through an MMI?
No.
I did not.
Okay. So essentially, at the school that I interviewed MMI-wise, they had 10 to 12 different interviewers. You had 10 minutes in each room, and you just went from one room to the next. I think there was a 2-minute buffer between each room.
Okay.
And you're in this cycle. So essentially, there's a big circle of 12 to...
Like the floor we're on right now, like you just go room to room to room?
Exactly. And there's the students that you're interviewing with just make a loop. So you see each of them, go into the room before you and leave. And at the school where I was, at least, the interviewer was told not to give any feedback. So I felt like I was talking to a wall.
Oh, man. So they just said, tell me?
Exactly. And a lot of these questions, in theory, the point of a multiple mini interview is to be able to get to understand you from multiple perspectives.
Sure.
And 10 interviewers might have a more holistic understanding of who you are than perhaps 1 or 2 interviewers.
Okay.
They ask you questions that are difficult to answer because they want to understand the way that you think.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, it'll be ethical dilemmas that they'll ask you about, especially medical ethical dilemmas. They'll ask you to do problem solving. 1 or 2 of them actually do ask about your background and where you come from. You can play games like 20 questions to see how you think and approach an unknown. So
Like they give you like the actual 20 questions thing? Or like you just played like the game 20 questions?
You play the game 20 questions.
Oh my God.
And one of them could be literally a coloring station because they want you to relax halfway through.
Wow.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. And so what I would recommend for people who are approaching MMIs is just Google the kind of questions that they could ask and give yourself 8 to 10 minutes to answer them. And be comfortable with the fact that you will be talking all the time, and try to maintain a conversation with yourself or pretend that you're answering someone else for 8 to 10 minutes and see how that feels and become comfortable with how that feels. I don't think I was comfortable enough for that,
Okay.
and I would really recommend people to do that.
What was like one of the craziest questions you got when you were going through it? Or like what's the one that like stands out that you're like, boom?
The thing that threw me was the 20 questions game.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just not something that I was expecting on a medical school interview, but it makes total sense why they would do it.
Sure.
But
Diagnostically, I guess.
Exactly.
So
What
were
were
you
they-
given the questions, or were you, or how did that work? Like if
He said, I'm thinking of a topic, you have 20 questions.
oh, okay, all right.
Goodness. Did you get it?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
And I feel like a lot of times too, they don't really even care if
No,
you get
it's,
it.
it's about your way of approaching things that you don't know.
Do you get all
Gotcha.
flustered and do you freak out, or like do you play along and like you have a good time with it?
Right,
Like
right.
Insightful questions.
Yeah, can you connect the things together?
Yeah,
That's
that's
interesting.
an interesting way. The experience we had at Loyola through our interviews is 2 like 40-minute, almost like hour-long interviews.
30 to 45 minutes.
Right. Did you feel that the MMI was less or more impersonal than maybe a sit-down conversation? I guess the question is,
Which did you prefer?
yeah.
I think totally see the validity of an MMI, and I'm not saying that an MMI is a bad thing. I was just thrown by the fact that people weren't responding the way that I usually would have someone respond to me in a conversation, but that could have just been specific to that one school where I was. I really enjoyed, especially my interviews here at Loyola. It felt like a friendly conversation than anything. There were, at least for mine, the interviewer put her paper away and we just talked, and I didn't even
That's
realize
nice.
that it had been 45 minutes by
Yeah.
the time had passed.
That's really nice. I was going to say, because, some interviews I went to, was the whole intimidation factor where the guy sat across from me with his arms crossed and said, well, tell me, I guess, why do you think you're here? And I was like, wow.
Oh.
Here we go.
Yeah.
And so that was an experience, not here at Loyola, but at a different school. And so that I think there are things that they can do to try and throw you off. But I guess I really appreciated the more genuine route that Loyola took with our interviews and just
Right.
saying, we're not here to shake you up. We're here to just get to know you.
Yeah.
And if you do find yourself in a situation where someone's being impersonal, or if someone's trying to, I think, quote unquote, scare you, just stick by your guns. The reason you're there interviewing is the fact that you stood out to them for some reason.
Right, they like you at that point.
Exactly. And so you're just proving to them that you are who you are and that you are amazing in the way that you are.
Yeah. So, Zosha, the $1 million question is, what stood out most on your application, do you think?
What stood out most on my application? I think the thing that people talked about was the swim team.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's going to have a really cool research. Everyone's going to do some sort of volunteering. And I think maybe the way that you approach the volunteering, or the story that you have the volunteering, or the story that you have with one of your other extracurriculars, what makes you stand out outside of your classes and your research, I think, is what will set you apart. And so I was able to talk about the swim team and the determination and the grit my friends and I had to be able to get to the point where we were able to bypass all that red tape. And it was a long process, but we made really meaningful friendships throughout the way.
And you probably had some really good stories from that too. It shows leadership. It shows the ability to work with other people. It shows to have the ability to take an idea and do something with it.
Perseverance to
yeah.
get through it. I think absolutely that is one thing that, like, find something. And, you know, like you said, everyone's going to have research. Everyone's going to have volunteering. But find that thing that you really like doing, or that you know is maybe different. Like, I had a friend of mine, his name's Nolan. Nolan, for listening, what's up?
Well, for doing that, Dan, what's going on?
His thing was spike ball. Like, he loved spike ball. He started like a spike ball league at our college, and like that was the thing that all his interviewers asked him. Like, tell me about spike ball. Like, so I think, like, we go to these interview processes expecting to, like, be like, you know, like, why do you want to be a physician? You know, like,
look at this slide. What is this? Tell me the pathology now.
This lady comes in and doesn't want to, you know, treat her kid, whatever. But, like, yes, there will be some of those questions, but more importantly, they want to know who you are as a human. Like, they can see all the other stuff on paper. Let's see why you're different.
They know you meet the metrics at that point.
Yeah.
Now they're just saying, all right, do we jive with this person? What do we think of this person? Like, are they going to be a good fit for the class? Are they going to cause a problem? Like, it's yours to take at that point. I feel like we've said a lot. Yeah. Once you're at the interview, they've already decided that if you pass this, they're going to take you.
Yeah.
So it's just yours to go for.
Yeah.
Just be yourself.
Yeah. So in the end, you're here at Loyola. In comparison to the other schools you interviewed at, may or may not have gotten in at, why do you think Loyola was the best fit for you?
Loyola, well, first of all, I think the interview was fabulous. Just the fact that they're able to sit down and they're able to talk, and we talked about things that were really passionate to me. I mentioned that since high school I've been really involved in social justice and volunteering. Something that I really am interested is the medical ethics of voluntourism, perhaps, or the ethics of medical voluntourism. And that's something that I have been, you know, I'm part of the bioethics honors program here, and it's something that Loyola is able to feed those interests, and they're able to provide mentors in areas that I feel like I need guidance in. Also, the fact, you know, judging off my name, I'm Polish. Being in Chicago, huge Polish population, the fact that we offer medical Polish here at Loyola is so cool. And it was funny because one of the admissions people, as I was leaving on my interview day, called after me as I was walking out the room. He said, "You teach Med Polish here, right?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely." I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I just felt like it was a very personal interview. And the way that people act here at Loyola is... everyone was so incredibly nice, and I knew that it wasn't just because I was an interviewer that day. It's just because of the way that they are.
Yeah. Great.
No, I agree with that too. I feel like this school just has a good vibe to it, and I feel like when I went through the process, people would say, you know, make sure you find that fit. And I didn't really take it that seriously until I came here, and you felt it. And you just said, okay, like, this is what people mean. Like, this is what you mean by fit.
I FaceTimed my mom afterwards, and she said, "You are glowing."
That's what my mom said, too. Yeah. She was like, it doesn't matter what else happens, like, the rest of the year. Like, I'm already just going to start setting my sights on that you're leaving. Like, I know you're going there.
Oh.
Awesome. Well, Zosha, thank you so much for chatting with us for a while.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
anytime.
Giving us your experience. I mean, you said so many great things, and, you know, I just hope everyone is able to
ignore
listen.
the noise.
Ignore the
noise.
You know?
Stick by your guns, and know who you are.
Absolutely. Well, this has been another episode of Three Guys in a White Coat. This is
Have you heard the ending before?
I have.
There you go.
Okay, so you know how it goes.
Yeah, so you're going to have to finish it off for us, if you wouldn't mind. This is Matt DeYoung signing off.
Mike signing off.
And Zosha signing off.
All right. Thank you, guys.